kids don't take no vacation in this land.
From Wondery, this is a special interview episode of Dr. Death, an investigative miniseries about the system that failed to protect 33 patients in Dallas. From time to time, we'll be releasing new episodes, keeping you up to date on the story of Christopher Duntsch, and new stories about our medical system. I've also had a number of people who knew Christopher Duntsch reach out to me since this podcast first aired. I'll be speaking with them over the coming weeks and months. So please subscribe wherever you're listening right now if you want to continue getting updates from us. Today I'm here again with the host of the podcast Business Wars and the former host of Marketplace, David Brown.
Hey there, Laura. It's great to be with you again. I've listened to all the episodes, and I know, like a lot of listeners, I have a lot of questions for you.
Great. So just hold that thought, and we'll be right back. Dr. Duntsch's story ended up in a courtroom. Every day, there are hundreds of thousands of cases winding their way through the U.S. court system. Most of these cases will never reach the media's attention, like Dr. Duntsch's did. But there are some that capture the attention of millions, and they may be cases that you've never heard of, but they change the way we live today. In the new podcast from Wondery, Legal Wars, host Hill Harper, actor and graduate of Harvard Law School, gives you a front-row seat to some of the most famous legal cases in U.S. history, from a trial that set off national riots to one that changed what freedoms the press has. Subscribe to Legal Wars today and stay tuned for a trailer at the end of the episode.
Laura, it's great to have this opportunity to talk with you about this series. You've covered the medical profession, the industry for many years, given, the gauntlet that professionals like Christopher Duntsch are supposed to have gone through. It seems inconceivable to laypersons that someone could have followed all those steps, dedicated so many years of their life to getting ready for the practice, that someone would not be qualified to step in to the operating room and perform the correct procedure.
Well, it's not only inconceivable to lay people, it's inconceivable to other doctors and members of the medical community that he would be so untrained.
What happened as you pull back, you step back and you think about, okay, this is a guy who went to medical school, he had surgical training in residency, and there wasn't a whole lot of detail in the podcast about that aspect. I mean, did he really do just 100 surgeries across all of his medical training? Which, put that in some perspective for us.
That figure of how many surgeries he had done was one of the more surprising things that I learned in working on this. So like everyone else listening, like me, the district attorney wanted to know how much training had he gotten, how many surgeries had he done. To answer this question, she had at her disposal something we do not have as journalists, and that is subpoena power. So she subpoenaed records from every hospital listed on his CV, asking for surgeries that he had directly participated in. These are not surgeries where he was just observing. She got back less than 100 records. So as far as we know, that figure is still accurate. Since the podcast has come out, no one has challenged me on it. I certainly asked the people at UT about it, but they weren't talking. I did hear from someone who did a residency with him, and he told me that he could believe that because he never saw him in the OR. But it really is a shockingly low figure, especially if you consider, I looked up the amount of surgeries just for comparison that a normal neurosurgery resident performs. And these records are kept with the Council for Graduate Medical Education, which keeps track of residency training. So the ballpark figure that they gave me was 1,000 surgeries completed during a neurosurgery residency. So it is quite low. I have no reason to think it's not accurate, but if it's accurate, it's quite surprising.
So I guess I'm wondering, this is so highly regulated. Where did the ball drop? And is that something that, in a larger sense, we should be concerned about as patients?
I don't know where the ball dropped in his residency. That's a big black box. in terms of the question of how concerned we should be as patients, so I know that this story is a pretty scary story. It's pretty hard to hear. It was pretty hard to tell, too. And there's this fine line between being scared and being skeptical. And I think that's where we want to be. So I want to make it absolutely clear that the vast majority of doctors are good, fine, caring people who want what's best for their patients. Clearly, Dr. Dench was an exception. The thing that you don't want is to be the patient of the exception. We certainly are limited in what we can find out about a doctor, but I think a skepticism, especially of a doctor you don't know, is not a bad thing. You could get a second opinion. And frankly, the thing I hear over and over again is talk to the nurses. The nurses know who the good surgeons are. They know who the good doctors are, and they will tell you. And if there's one overriding good thing I think that comes from getting this story out there is that people now who have heard it will at least take that extra measure of care to the degree that they can to protect themselves.
But it does raise, a whole further line of inquiry for you, and that is, as you spoke with other medical professionals, and I know that some have reached out to you in the course of this podcast rolling out, this series rolling out, what's been the reaction to you telling their story and maybe to other professionals opening up to you?
The vast majority of physicians and nurses and other people in the healthcare community who contacted me or contacted Wondery have been very positive. Doctors were the heroes of this story, too. It was doctors who were trying to work to solve this problem. So in no way are doctors the villains of this story at all. And I think they recognize that. I've heard from OR nurses who have listened to this podcast and said, this motivates me to speak up more when maybe I wouldn't have. I would have just deferred everything to the surgeon. So that part is good. I can tell you, though, the one part of it that they took exception to, and this is understandable, is when I started talking about whether tort reform was a factor in really trying to bring justice for patients, the patients who were hurt. Tort reform is a very sensitive subject for physicians. It was not my intention to attack doctors on this, only to point out the role that it played in this story. And I want to say one other thing about tort reform. When I first started reporting this story, it never occurred to me to report on it. It never occurred to me that this was part of the story. This only came up in talking with the victims and their frustration with it.
And what we're really talking about when we're talking about tort reform is we're talking about the liability that doctors and hospitals and perhaps others in the operating room may have to patients who don't receive the proper standard of care.
Right, and the caps that have been set on that. And that's a long and ongoing discussion. And
yeah,
I think most physicians sort of saw it in the context, but I did get more than a few messages from people who said, I was with you until you got to episode 6 and tort reform.
That's so interesting. One of the most phenomenal aspects of the podcast series were these recorded phone calls from Dr. Henderson. I mean, you get such a real tick-tock of the events. Why did he make those recordings in the first place?
I can tell you that he said those words that is every reporter's dream before you go to an interview. He sends me an email and says, well, you might want to bring a USB because I have lots of stuff, which is something you really want to hear. And it's not
yeah, it's like a gold mine. My gosh.
Oh, my gosh. And it wasn't just the phone calls. He had kept every email that he sent regarding Dr. Dench. And he had that, and I had those too. So I think probably by nature, he's a meticulous record keeper. But he also knew that this was so bad that there was going to be some kind of litigation involved. And so he wanted a record just for his own sake of what was going on. Now, he wasn't thinking criminal. He was thinking this would be part of some civil litigation. And so that's why he kept those records. And I have to say that all of those records and the phone calls and everything, they provided a tremendous real-time timeline for me of when certain things were happening. I mean, he noted received phone call from so-and-so, and he would make a note of it. He kept records of everything, so it really gave me a window of what was happening when that was so invaluable.
How did you first get involved with this story? I know that you were a health reporter and a longtime science reporter, too.
Yes, in Dallas, where I've been really almost all of my career for the past 20 or so years. I worked at the Dallas Morning News, and about 10 years ago, I quit to try to freelance, and I've been doing that ever since. So up until last December, I really didn't know any more about Christopher Duntsch than anybody else in Dallas. It was a big local story. I knew what I had read in the newspapers, seen on TV. I had read the D Magazine cover story on him. And in December, out of the blue, I got contacted by Wondery. They had gotten a tip about the story. And they asked me if I would be willing to put together a podcast about him. And my first reaction was, well, I'm a print reporter, right? I didn't know much about audio. Years ago, I had done one audio story for the NPR program, This American Life, and that was about it. And so they said they were willing to teach me what I needed to know about audio and that they would help me with that part. And as long as I could handle the reporting and the writing, and they were a great team, I think it shows in the product. So even though you hear my voice and it was my reporting, I was definitely not working alone here. There's a big team of people behind me.
I think something that may be lost on some listeners is when you're working in this audio medium, it's sometimes hard to get people to open up to you because there's a microphone right in front of them or in the room. And there's something about having your voice on tape that makes people sometimes reluctant. And yet these people were telling you amazing stories that were just, in many cases, opening up to you in ways that were really surprising. It was almost like the microphone disappeared somehow. How did you do that?
Well, I have to say first that the people who did share their stories with me, I was and am extremely grateful that they talked about this. This was, I know, very difficult for them. One thing that I have learned over the years, when you do talk to someone, especially about a traumatic event, is to realize that that event is not who they are as a person. I think all reporters who write about terrible things that happen to people, you first ask them about who they are and who they were before this happened, to recognize that you are a whole person. You're not just about this event. And I think that people will tell their stories as long as you recognize and they know that you know that they are a whole person.
Dr. Death is brought to you by SimpliSafe Home Security. One of our cars was broken into last week. I guess we left it unlocked. When we were trying to get out of the house in the morning, we found the car door ajar, the glove compartment contents thrown everywhere, a real mess. Nothing of value was taken, maybe a few loose coins. But it's not the value of what was taken, or the inconvenience of cleaning up afterwards. It's the violent intrusion of a stranger into our lives. It's unwelcome. That's the same feeling that led electrical engineer Chad Lawrence to start SimpliSafe. When some friends were burglarized, they complained that there weren't any good options for home security. The systems were outdated. The company selling them insisted on pricey contracts. So Chad changed the game. No fees, no contracts, and an intuitive, easy-to-use system I was able to install myself. Now, SimpliSafe is the top choice security system of CNET, PCMag, and the Wirecutter. But most importantly, over 2 million people trust SimpliSafe to keep them safe. Go to simplisafe.com/doctor to order your own SimpliSafe home security system today. That's simplisafe.com/doctor to protect your home and family with SimpliSafe. simplisafe.com/doctor.
While we're talking about the nuts and bolts here, what's up with that Best Docs video? For people who don't know what the Best Docs video is, what is that and how did that come about and how did that play a factor here?
So the Best Docs video was in the podcast a couple of times.
Before I went to see Dr. Duntsch, I probably had back the neck and shoulder and arm pain for about 5 years.
This is an infomercial that Christopher Dench paid to have put together, and it has him talking with a patient who talks about how great Dr. Dench is.
So he came in and explained to me that he was going to remove that disc, and then he was going to do a fusion of 4 and 6 and fuse that back together to strengthen me and hold me, and the pain would be virtually gone, and he was correct.
There was nothing on the video that really identified the patient who is talking about how great Dr. Dench is. So I had finally decided it was one of two possibilities. He did have one patient who got better after the surgery. He had one successful surgery. So either it was her or it was just somebody he paid to pretend to be a patient. After these months of looking at this video, I really decided that it was probably the second thing, that it was just some random person that he had pulled out or the production company had pulled out to make seem like a real patient. But it turns out neither of those are actually what happened. And since that video has come out, I've actually been in touch with the patient who is in that video. And I can't go into all the details of the story now, but it's pretty mind-blowing. And as soon as we put that together, we will include that on a future episode. But she was actually one of Dr. Dench's victims.
Boy, talk about a tease. My gosh, I can't wait to hear that episode when it comes out. What about Dr. Dench himself? In terms of your interaction with him, with his family, how did that go?
I would obviously have loved to talk to him and ask him some of these questions. His attorney is not allowing interviews right now because the case is on appeal. So he was out of the picture, but I wanted more than anything really to speak with his father. You can hear from those jail calls that we heard how loving and heartbroken he is over everything that's happened. And I thought his dad could really provide a voice that we would not get otherwise, and a side to Christopher Dench that we would not get otherwise. And I did reach out to his dad, and his dad, I can't say he said yes, but he was interested, and he approached his attorney as well. He said, I can't do it without approval from Chris's attorney because she's handling everything. And so ultimately she said no. But I would have loved to sit down with his dad and really hear that part of the story that I couldn't get from anywhere else.
What about his mom? Is his mom still in the picture?
Yes, she is. And his family is still there. They were at the appeal. I think his family's been very supportive. I can't speak for them, but I imagine they're trying to understand the understandable. And both his parents testified in court. So, yeah, I think his family is still in the picture and still trying to get him freed from prison.
You know, I'm a little reluctant to go here, Laura, because we're entering the realm of speculation somewhat, but it was part of your reporting, and that is that he played football as a younger man, and I'm wondering, do you think that brain injury from his years as a football player might have had something to do with his behavior?
It's a very interesting question, and believe me, you're not the only one who has brought this up, especially in these times when we're so concerned about injuries from concussions to football players. I did talk with Dr. Jim Fallon, who was from UC Irvine, about this possibility. Dr. Fallon was in episode 6, and we just didn't have room to really explore this in that episode because there was already a lot going on there. But he did bring this up. And first of all, as you said, we have to couch this in terms that we don't know. This is total speculation. He did bring up one particular kind of injury, not CTE, but another type of injury to another part of the brain. So let's remember there's more than one kind of head injury. And the type of injury that he talked about was one that could cause personality changes in the way you speak, increasing paranoia, disorientation. Remember that Christopher Duntsch had trouble driving without getting lost. So we don't know. We can't diagnose this. We certainly can't diagnose him from afar. And some of these injuries wouldn't even be evident unless he had an MRI. But it certainly is within the realm of possibility. And it's one possibility among many possibilities that might explain his behavior.
Substance abuse? I mean, as I recall, he took the fifth, right?
Certainly, substance abuse had a lot to do with his behavior. We don't know how much.
You've said that you're talking with other people and they're coming forward now as a result of this series, and you're already planning to do more podcasts. This almost seems like it's, as you peel away the layers, that there's almost no core because so many lives have been touched here. How long do you intend to keep digging on this story?
I'm not going to keep digging just to be digging if I'm not finding out anything that's new or enlightening. For example, someone else that might tell the story of seeing him use cocaine or, concerned about his substance abuse. Well, that we've already established that was a concern. So I think I'll keep digging if someone has new information that might provide some insight on something we don't already know. For example, the Best Docs video. That was a story that I didn't know, and now I do. So I won't keep doing it just to do it. But that said, I will keep following the events as they happen.
Laura, I can't help but wonder, and I guess this is directed more sort of at how this has affected you. You work on a story for 8 or 9 months with so many human dimensions and so much tragedy involved. And yet, what a story it is and how much it throws light on both the strengths and the weaknesses of our healthcare system. How has it changed you, if at all? I mean, obviously you want to maintain a certain editorial distance from the subject that you cover, but it's hard to imagine that this hasn't had an impact on you personally.
Well, I've been reporting on the medical world for many, many years, so it wouldn't affect me personally as much as it might affect someone hearing a story like this for the first time. So I certainly knew that there were doctors slipping through the system who should not be. And since the podcast has come out, I've heard from people pointing me to many more where this appears to be the case, although none quite as bad as this. So it didn't exactly change the way I think about the medical system, because I still believe that doctors are good, and I still believe the vast majority of doctors are good. But it certainly reinforced to me that by whatever means necessary, you have to dig as hard as you can before you have, especially something like neurosurgery, to find out as much as you possibly can about any doctor.
So this is episode 8, the second of 2 bonus episodes. What about an episode 9? Are you already thinking that one through?
Well, I do hope to continue to hear from people who knew Christopher Duntsch, who might be able to tell me more about him. So if you're one of those people, do feel free to contact me. I'm still gathering those stories. And we'll definitely be telling the story of the patient from the Best Docs video. It's pretty mind-blowing, and that will be on an episode soon.
This has been so interesting. The entire series has been fantastic. Laura Beil, the reporter and host for Dr. Death, thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my questions and questions that listeners have had. And congratulations again. It's just a riveting series.
Thank you.
Whoa, it don't take no vacation in this land.
From Wondery, this was a special episode of Dr. Death, an investigative miniseries about the system that failed to protect 33 patients in Dallas. If you'd like to help us spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe. If you know of a story like Dr. Death or Dirty John that needs to be investigated, please write to us at tips@wondery.com. In the meantime, I want to thank my colleague David Brown and recommend the podcast he hosts, Business Wars. I also want to recommend a new podcast premiering today called Legal Wars, which tells the stories of some of the most compelling court cases of our time. You'll hear a trailer for Legal Wars right now.
Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, we have.
Every day around the United States, verdicts are given and lives are changed.
How say you, Madam Foreperson?
The stakes might be different, but every case leaves its mark.
We, the jury, find the defendant in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty.
The court of law can be a battlefield over money, paternity, even people's lives.
Has been acquitted.
And the consequences can be huge.
After the verdict, they
said she's extremely excited by the Supreme Court.
If you're sitting in the jury box, what would you do? From Wondery, the network behind Dirty John and American History Tellers, Legal Wars puts you in the center of some of the most famous and infamous cases in American history. From Hulk Hogan's courtroom wrestling match with Gawker to the battle for free speech on the internet and the Rodney King trial that set off the LA riots. On Wondery's new series, Legal Wars, we'll take you through all the surprising twists and turns behind those cases and many more. I'm Hill Harper. Legal Wars premieres October 9th. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. I tell you, you're gonna love Legal Wars, so check us out. Legal Wars. See you in court.